Another sleepless night begins. Welcome back, my sleepless ones. Tonight's remembrance takes us to a place many of you may recognize, not by name, but by feeling. That unsettling awareness when you enter a space that feels wrong. A place where the walls have absorbed too much, where the air itself seems to resist your presence. I speak of room 731. Before we begin, I must ask you, as always, have any among you encountered a room 731? Leave your whispers in the night whispers below. Now, let us remember. Our story begins with Martin Clearwater, a pharmaceutical sales representative who spent 208 nights on the road last year. Martin knew hotel rooms better than he knew his own bedroom. The way the air conditioning always blew too cold or not at all, the subtle variations in shower pressure, the exact sound of ice machines at 3 a.m. After 9 years on the road, Martin believed he'd seen every kind of room there was to see. Until September 17th, 2019. Martin had checked into the Waldridge Hotel, a 27-story building constructed in 1973 on the outskirts of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The Waldridge wasn't remarkable in any way. Clean enough, quiet enough, with the expected amenities for a mid-range business hotel. His company had booked him for 3 nights while he visited medical offices throughout the region. After a tedious check-in, Martin took the elevator to the 7th floor. The hallway stretched before him, brown carpet with gold diamond patterns, beige walls with landscape paintings every few doors. Room 731 was near the end of the hall, just past the ice and vending machines. The room appeared perfectly ordinary. King bed with white linens, dark wooden desk, flat-screen TV, beige curtains. Martin had been in thousands of rooms exactly like it. He dropped his suitcase by the closet, placed his laptop on the desk, and headed to the bathroom. That's when he first noticed something strange. The bathroom mirror didn't reflect properly. His movements seemed to lag by a fraction of a second. Martin waved his hand, watching his reflection follow just slightly behind. He rubbed his eyes, blaming fatigue from the 5-hour drive. That night, he dreamed of knocking. Soft at first, then increasingly urgent, knocking from inside the walls, knocking from under the bed, knocking from within the closet. He woke at 3:17 a.m., the red numbers of the alarm clock burning in the darkness. The knocking had stopped, but the room felt different. The air seemed thicker somehow, as though the oxygen content had been subtly altered. Martin switched on the bedside lamp. The room looked normal, yet not. He couldn't place what had changed. The desk seemed a few inches to the left of where it had been. The painting above it, a faded watercolor of a lighthouse, now showed a lighthouse with a dark shape in one window. He blinked and everything shifted back to normal. Just tired, he whispered to himself. Just tired. The next morning, Martin felt refreshed. The strange experiences of the night seemed like nothing more than dreams. He showered, dressed, and left for his meetings. All day, as he smiled through presentations about a new diabetes medication, Martin found his thoughts drifting back to room 731, particularly to the closet, which he realized he hadn't opened. That detail bothered him, though he couldn't articulate why. Who doesn't open the closet in a hotel room? It was a standard action. Hang up shirts, store the suitcase. Why had he forgotten? When Martin returned to the Waldridge that evening, he felt a strange reluctance as he approached room 731. His key card took 3 attempts to work. The room was exactly as he'd left it. Housekeeping had made the bed, replaced the towels. Everything looked clean, ordinary. Martin walked directly to the closet and opened it. Empty hangers, a spare blanket on the shelf, an iron and ironing board, his suitcase where he'd left it. He exhaled, feeling foolish. That night, Martin worked until midnight, preparing for the next day's meetings. As he finally closed his laptop, he noticed something on the desk. A small black mark that hadn't been there before. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be a perfect circle about the size of a dime, dark against the wood. When he touched it, his finger came away clean. Not a stain, but as though that small circle of the desk had been charred. Martin looked around the room and noticed another black circle on the wall near the bathroom. Then another by the TV, and another on the ceiling. Within minutes, Martin had counted 17 perfect black circles throughout room 731, each one exactly the same size. Each one appeared burned into the surface. They had not been there earlier. Of this, he was certain. Martin considered calling the front desk, but stopped himself. How would he explain this? What would he even say? That someone had snuck into his room to burn tiny circles everywhere? That the circles had appeared by magic? Instead, he took a sleeping pill from his toiletry bag and went to bed. The knocking returned in his dreams. Louder now, more insistent, and voices joined it. Whispers too quiet to understand, but clearly human. Martin tossed in his sleep, the sheets twisting around him as the knocking and whispering built to a crescendo. He woke with a gasp at exactly 3:17 a.m. The room was different. The black circles had multiplied, hundreds of them now, on every surface, evenly spaced like a grid. The air felt noticeably thicker, and a subtle odor hung in the room, something medicinal, like antiseptic. And Martin wasn't alone. In the corner of the room, between the desk and the window, stood a figure. It remained perfectly still, a silhouette darker than the surrounding darkness. Martin couldn't make out features, just a human-shaped void in the dim light filtering through the curtains. Martin tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood, watching. Slowly, Martin reached for the bedside lamp. His fingers found the switch. Light flooded the room. The figure was gone. The black circles were gone. Room 731 appeared completely normal. Martin didn't sleep again that night. He sat upright in bed, lamp on, waiting for dawn. At the first hint of sunlight, he packed his belongings, left his keycard in the room, and departed without checking out. He called his manager from the car, claiming food poisoning, and drove home, abandoning his remaining appointments. For 3 months, Martin didn't think about room 731. He requested a different territory, one that wouldn't take him near Portsmouth. His company agreed, and Martin settled into a new routine that kept him in the southwestern states. Until the email arrived. It came from an address Martin didn't recognize. Room 731 at waldridge.net. The subject line read, "Only we miss you." The body of the email contained nothing but a series of black circles arranged in a grid. Martin deleted it immediately, blocked the sender, changed his email password. 2 days later, his phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Room 731 has been prepared for your return." Martin changed his phone number that afternoon. The following night, as he entered his apartment after work, something caught his eye on the wall of his living room. A small black circle, the size of a dime. When he touched it, his finger came away clean. Not a stain. As though that small circle of wall had been charred. Martin moved out the next day, leaving most of his belongings behind. He stayed with a college friend while looking for a new place. explaining he had mold issues in his apartment. He didn't tell anyone about room 731, the emails, the texts, or the black circle. 2 weeks later, Martin signed a lease on a new apartment across town. On moving day, as the landlord handed him the keys, she smiled and said, "You're in apartment 731. I hope you'll be happy here." Martin dropped the keys as though they had burned him. "I can't," he stammered. "I'm sorry. I can't take it." He forfeited his security deposit and fled. For the next 6 months, Martin lived in constant motion. He quit his job, cashed out his 401k, and traveled, never staying more than 2 nights in any location. He avoided hotels when possible, opting for hostels, vacation rentals, even sleeping in his car. He thought he was being careful. He paid cash everywhere, used prepaid cards for online bookings, never used his real name. But room 731 was patient. In a small motel outside Albuquerque, Martin awoke at 3:17 a.m. to find the walls of his room covered in black circles, the air thick with antiseptic smell, and not one, but 3 figures standing at the foot of his bed, still as statues, darker than darkness. Martin screamed, but no sound came out, his voice swallowed by the dense air. The figures moved then, not toward him, but into the walls themselves, passing through solid matter as though it were mist. As they disappeared, Martin heard the knocking again, from inside the walls. When dawn broke, Martin checked the room number on his door for the first time. Room 137. The numbers had been reversed, a trick he hadn't noticed at check-in. That day, Martin drove to a remote hiking trail in the Sandia Mountains. He left his car in the parking lot with his wallet, phone, and a note that read only, "I am going to room 731. Don't follow." He was reported missing 3 days later when the park ranger noticed the abandoned vehicle. Martin Clearwater was never found. But this is not where our remembrance ends, my sleepless ones.
She was assigned to room 731. 6 months after Martin's disappearance, a pharmaceutical sales representative named Eliza Chen checked into the Waldridge Hotel in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. She was assigned to room 731. Upon entering, she immediately noticed something odd. Tiny white circles on the surfaces as though small areas had been bleached. She counted 17 of them. That night, at 3:17 a.m., Eliza woke to knocking. When she turned on the light, she found Martin Clearwater standing in the corner of the room between the desk and the window. His eyes were black circles, his mouth open to speak, but the only sound was more knocking. Behind him stood other figures, dozens of them, stretching back impossibly far, as though the corner of room 731 extended into infinity, all with black circle eyes, all knocking. Eliza Chen disappeared that night. The hotel's security footage showed her entering room 731 at 11:42 p.m. No one ever exited. Since then, there have been 7 more disappearances connected to room 731 at the Waldridge. The hotel has renovated repeatedly, changing the room numbering system, even sealing off that section of the 7th floor. But room 731 persists. It has been documented in 37 different hotels across 23 states, always with the black circles, always with the knocking, always with the figures that watch from corners. What is room 731? Some believe it's a thin place, where the membrane between our world and another has worn to transparency. Others suggest it's a collective manifestation, a thought form created by the thousands of troubled dreams, that have occurred in hotel rooms throughout history. I believe it's something else entirely. I believe room 731 has always existed. It merely wears the disguise of a hotel room because such spaces, transient, liminal, anonymous, provide perfect hunting grounds. The most disturbing theory, whispered among the sleepless, is that room 731 is not a place at all. It's an entity that spreads like a virus of perception. Once you've recognized it, it recognizes you. Once you've seen the black circles, they begin to see you. Which brings me to the final part of tonight's remembrance. 3 weeks ago, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize, room 731 at congregation.net. The subject line read, "We are coming." The body contained nothing but a grid of black circles. Since then, I've noticed small black circles appearing in my home one by one, 17 so far. And each night at exactly 3:17 a.m., I wake to knocking. It's getting closer. So now I've shared this remembrance with you, my sleepless ones. The burden of knowledge is now yours as well as mine. Watch for the black circles. Listen for the knocking. Be careful which rooms you enter. And check the number on your door. It might not be what you remember. Until tomorrow night, remember, we don't sleep. We remember.